With that, I'm going to introduce Prerna Kaul. Prerna is a product leader with 11 years of product and engineering experience, working at the intersection of retail business, platform products, and artificial intelligence. She's a senior technical product manager responsible for building B2B ML products at Amazon. And prior to her current role, was a mobile product manager at Walmart Labs and has worked at Citi and Points. With that, I'm going to pass over to Prerna to get us started today with the event.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Scott. I'm excited to be here and excited to speak with the product board community. I'll start with a brief introduction on myself, although I think Scott did a great job giving you the background on my experience. Let me start by sharing my screen. As Scott mentioned, my background is that I'm a AI ML product manager at Amazon. What this means is I primarily work on building solutions that have an ML component to them. And I work within the Alexa organization. So my charter or my focus is on ML automation. What I really build is products that ensure Alexa's models can perform at higher quality, and we can continue to drive efficiency in actually building these models. Think, trillions of data sets. The number of records, the number of features that go into a single model would be in the order of trillions, and you need to get very methodical and focused on how you are building these models and how you're driving up the efficiency at the same time. So economies of scale is definitely something that is a top consideration given the size and scope of Alexa. And that's really where I come in. I work for the platform organization within Alexa, and we primarily build ML automation products for quality and cost. Let me start by giving you an overview of the topics we'll cover today. And I think this will help. I know the topic of how not to launch AI/ML products may be a little bit more nuanced than other presentations in this space. And I think that the reason why I chose this topic, I'll start by sharing why I chose this topic, is because I feel like we talk a lot about, how cool AI/ML is and how to bring in machine learning into your products and, what it takes, but we don't really discuss as much the failures or the pitfalls as you launch these products. One side of the story is, do you even need machine learning in the first place? And the second is, okay, well, once you've decided to build a machine learning product, how can you continue to hone in on the right problems and continue to solve the right problems and then build product that is world-class, right? And that's really the core of it. The problem in my head that I keep grappling with is, how do I build world-class products in this space? And I felt that it would be a perfect opportunity to take to actually go through the process of all of the successes and failures that I have encountered in doing so. And let me pause there and say that if anybody has questions as I go through my slides, I don't want this to be a one-way conversation. Please feel free to raise your hands. We also have Q&A at the end. So I anticipate we'll have questions at the end, but if at any point you'd like to stop me and think it would be beneficial to dive deeper into any of these topics, feel free to do so. Yeah, so the agenda. I'd like to start by kind of discussing the different phases of machine learning development. Then go into talking about pitfalls across two components, one on the product discovery side, and then the other on product development. Under product discovery, I think that customer interviews and the customer journey are two areas I'd like to cover. And then under product development, we'll go through the machine learning pipeline. We'll talk about how to build an effective MVP, and then how to actually go about A/B experimentation and iteration in this space. So let's start by kind of talking about the different phases, and I'll cover that in my background. So how one should think about machine learning products and how to phase this is you have your typical software development lifecycle, and I assume the audience is familiar with software product management to a certain extent. Within that lifecycle, you have your requirements gathering phase, you have your scoping, implementation, and launch. Across each of these phases, this additional component of machine learning, where it comes in, is you need to constantly start diving into the problem and then take a step back and go into the solution. So let me give you an example, right? And I think based on my previous background, I can kind of share. Think about you're launching a machine learning model for users in the recommendation space. So, you're an Amazon.com product manager, and you want to launch a recommendations engine. And you've already kind of figured out that, customers, they like recommendations because it's, takes away decision-making fatigue, and you want to give your users a better experience. Well, in the requirements gathering phase, you would go through customer interviews and you would talk to customers. But at the same time, you have to kind of, like, the added lens here is you kind of have to keep in mind that, oh, I'll have to get enough data and I'll have to have the right feature sets to actually build a recommendation engine. So even going into the problem, you would constantly, once you've kind of like done your customer discovery process and interview process, you would actually have to think about, well, how am I going to get sufficient data to build a machine learning model to solve for this problem? So it's a very like nuanced thing where you have to constantly think about, well, is there an opportunity to generalize this problem using machine learning, or is it too niche or too specific where I simply need like a decision tree or a software solution? Super important, super critical point that I wanted to make. So that leads me to the first pitfall. I spoke to you a little bit about the customer interview process, and I think we discussed what would it take to better understand what your solution should look like. Underneath that, I think it's super important to get very crystal clear on what exactly would be differentiated for customers. So by that, I mean, I could ask them questions like, what's the hardest part about being a vegetarian? So I love this question because, it's so general. It's like, I could give you a list of things. So let's say I asked you this question, what's the hardest part about being a vegetarian? Where you could tell me, I don't have options. There's, too many restrictions. When I go out, I have to ask all these questions to the waiter or the waitress. And it's challenging because, the world wasn't built for people like me. I have so many like restrictions. And then when I'm going out with a group of people, they have to keep in mind that, the restaurant we're going to should be vegetarian friendly. And, I can't travel anywhere. I want to go to Europe, and like I had no options. And so you can kind of see the trend here where it's going in all these different directions, but it's not really helping you kind of pull forward and hone in and tease out, what is the exact thing that would be differentiated and actually offer value to the customer. So instead, what you could do is you could get very specific and say, okay, so I'm trying to scope down the problem and really understand, okay, when this person is eating at home, maybe they have certain challenges, or if they're eating out, they may have others. If they're going with friends, it could be a different thing. If they're traveling, it could be different. So then you kind of scope your problem, you hone in on the exact issue you're trying to solve, and then you ask questions around that. The question here would be, what's the hardest part about eating out as a vegetarian? And then they will be able to tell you, well, okay, so when I went to XYZ restaurant, I didn't have options. And, my friends were frustrated with me because I took so long to make a decision. And so these are the sorts of insights that you would not be able to tease out unless and until you ask specific questions. And I feel this is a general process with product discovery, but I also think, like, even in machine learning, you cannot ignore this step. It is necessary. It is imperative to ensure that you're building the right product for your customer. And once you put in that effort and actually launch something, it will help your customers. So instead, the kinds of questions you could ask could be more specific. You would try to hone in on specific situations. So can you tell me about the last time that happened? Why was that hard? What don't you love about the solutions you've tried? I think these are the sorts of questions that will really help you hone in and narrow down on the problem. And to that point, I think as an outcome of your product discovery, you may be familiar with this mind map or this journey map of customers, where you're really trying to map out, well, across the value chain of everything that they do. So in the awareness phase, in consideration, in purchase and onboarding, and finally in retention, what are the pain points that they're experiencing? What are their touch points? What are the emotions? And what actions are they taking to solve for their problem? I feel this mapping has really helped me. It has helped me in my career as an e-commerce product manager, as a B2C product manager, as well as in the ML space. Because you're really trying to, ensure that you're maximizing the value of your product across each phase. And without actually doing this exercise as a result of the product discovery process, I feel it would be difficult to get to that nuance, right? And build the right product and come up with the right requirements. And I think this clarity, the clarity that this kind of a mind mapping gives you it's something that you cannot replace. And it's not something that comes easily either. And it's something that only the product manager can do within the team. So I feel that this is kind of critical to the role. Any questions so far? I've gone through the first pitfall. I'd be curious to kind of see if anybody has any thoughts that they'd like to share, any questions. Happy to go through that. I see some questions in the chat. How long would this process typically take you? I think that's a great question, right? You may not like my answer, but I will say it depends. It should ideally be a decision where you're, determining that I've gotten or gathered enough data where I have 80% of the information to proceed. And that may take you differing amounts of time based on your use case. So in the past, I'll give you an example. When I was working for Walmart Labs, I launched a B2C product called Scan and Go at Walmart. And our product discovery process involved doing walk the stores with customers. So we went in with a user prototype and actually talked to customers of all ages, right? We would go to specific cities where there were only seniors, then others where it was metropolitan and you had all sorts of people, then others where only working moms would come into Walmart. And we had to actually go in and talk to each of these customer cohorts, which took a couple of weeks to come up with the right kind of problem space, really understand the problem space, and then propose the right solution. But with some internal customers, as an example, with my work in Alexa, I could do the same process in a matter of 2 weeks, where I think my goals and what I'm trying to solve for become a little bit more crystallized, because I'm talking to internal customers and they're B2B customers. And so they have clear metrics that they're tracking backwards from. And that makes the discovery process a little bit easier in comparison with, maybe a B2C customer that may have differing goals. So I think that it is definitely a high judgment decision where you're determining, do I have enough information to build the right solution, or do I need to keep digging? And you'll see that experienced PMs are very good at deciding, okay, I'm done. I need to stop discovery now. I can move on. Whereas PMs who may be more junior will just keep going and doing the same exercise again and again and again, talking to different customers. coming up with the same conclusions, but not really stopping at the right spot, which is also a problem. Does that answer your question, Richard? Perfect. Great. Any others? Okay, great. So I'll move on to my next pitfall. I think the second one, and I especially find this useful when I think about B2B products. I think competitive analysis in the B2C space is pretty well thought out, right? I think there's like a huge plethora of literature, books, talks, courses that you can take on understanding how to break down gap analysis, competitive analysis in the B2C space. There's so many, different, resources out there where you can choose from to actually come up with a good mental model. With B2B products, it becomes especially interesting because your customers may not even be familiar that they have an issue. So when you talk to them, sometimes they've not thought of a potential solution. Maybe they just came up with something on their own and they don't know they're being inefficient. So I'll give you an example. I recently spoke with, a partner team within Alexa, and we asked them about A/B experimentation. So I asked them, what are you using for A/B experimentation? And they gave me an example of, how they do A/B experimentation, and they've built everything from scratch. And they have a pretty good cadence where they're able to complete their A/B experimentation in like a matter of 1 or 2 weeks, and then launch their product. And then I started asking them more questions. Well, how do you know you have enough traffic going through it? How do you ensure your data is statistically significant? How do you make sure that it's a repeatable process? How are you automating? How are you ensuring you're maximizing your resources? And when I started asking these questions, I found that it was like a very niche process that was built only for their team, did not scale well even to other teams within their own organization, within their own department. And they didn't necessarily know they had a problem. And then I had to kind of come in and say, well, no, actually, there's a better way to do this. It will cost you X dollars. Here's how other teams are implementing it. And this is why this is a better process than what you're doing today. And I think unless and until you understand the full landscape of what's available and do that gap analysis on your own, it's not possible to give your customers that insight. I'd like to share this photo of Siobhan Zillis, who's the project director. I think she's part of the office of the CEO at Neuralink. She works pretty closely with Elon Musk. So how she started off in her career was she published this like really cool competitive landscape of all of the different segments within machine learning, where there are new startups and new ideas emerging. And then she broke down within that, within each segment, within each vertical, what are the different horizontal sort of segments that are being tackled by different sorts of businesses. And she did a really thorough analysis and published it in Bloomberg, and landed the opportunity to work as a sort of a leading VC within Bloomberg Beta, and that her career kind of took off from there. And she, for me, is like sort of the shining example of how to do competitive analysis well. And I often refer back to this diagram when I do my own gap analysis, because I think, okay, well, what is the level of research that really goes into understanding what other solutions your customers have? And this for me is sort of the gold standard. Yeah, let me pause there again. Please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Does competitive analysis create a bias? And then how do you find out what your customers consider a differentiated capability within machine learning? I think both great questions. I'll go one by one. I would say it depends on the stage, Akash. So in your customer discovery process, in this part of the process, you don't want to dive too deep into competitive analysis. Your focus is very much on understanding the customer problem, scoping it, understanding what can you offer that's differentiated, doing your customer journey mapping and empathy mapping, really understanding their emotions, pain points, and touch points. And this exercise is exclusive of any kind of competitive analysis. But once you've done that and you've come up with your proposed solution, and you've had the opportunity to really kind of validate it, both from a feasibility and viability standpoint, I think it is important to understand, what solutions customers are using, because then you get into, well, if I launch something, will I meet my success criteria of adoption, retention? Will I be able to ask users to pay for this product? I think those questions really come in. So I would divide it into two phases. There's the problem space and the solution space. In the problem space, absolutely. There is no reason to go into competitive analysis because you're really trying to solve for something differentiated for the customer. If you talk about competitive analysis there, well, you may be encountering, you may just be proposing something where there's a high likelihood your solution is cannibalized by something else. But when you get into the solution space, especially when you're asking your customers to pay for something, I think it is important to understand what else is out there. We don't, within Amazon, I think we say, don't focus on your competitors, focus on the customers. And I think that's absolutely right. But as you continue to dive deeper into the solution space and you've had a chance to iterate and learn, competitive analysis does become part of the role, part of the job. It is another way to, convince your customers that you're the expert in this field and they should adopt your solution. Chris, how do you find out what your customers consider differentiated capability within machine learning? Oh, that's an interesting question, right? So I would say it doesn't really matter whether they consider it a differentiated capability within machine learning. I think it matters whether whatever solution you're offering is something that they are convinced by looking at the data or looking at, in our case, I think our customers end up being ML scientists. So they are very much focused on the metrics, the data, really understanding any ML solution we're building, how is it like helping them exceed the bar and meet their quality goals, be more efficient. And they would just look at the data metrics, right? So if what we're providing gives them that lift that they're looking for and does not create any sort of bias and can be scaled, that is something that they would consider. So I'd like divide it into three things. I would say, the metrics itself, the lack of bias, and the scalability of the solution. I think our customers would look at these three things in the machine learning space and say, okay, I'm good. I think I would like to continue with the solution or not, right? Their focus is not so much on what ML model you're using under the hood and whether it's complex enough. They may be interested in those details, but that's not really their focus. They want to make business impact just as much as any B2C customer who wants to save time or save cost or make money, right? So I think that it's the same sort of beats that you would see in a B2C space as well. It's just they are very much focused on the data. Any other questions there, Chris, Akash? Anybody else? What if your potential customers are not able to fully understand their problem, nor what you are explaining as an advantage of machine learning? So there are two parts to your question. So the first part is, what if your customers don't fully understand what the issue is, what the problem is? And second is, what if you cannot explain, or maybe they don't have the sort of the expertise or the knowledge to understand the advantage of machine learning. So let me tackle the first part of the problem, which is like, maybe customers can't fully understand the problem, right? Oh, I see there's a follow-up comment. They're scared of AI/ML because they don't understand it. Wow. That's really interesting. I think this could be a very interesting discussion topic. So I think fully understanding the problem, customers don't have to fully understand the problem. That's something that we need to tease out with them. It's maybe I can liken this to like being a shrink, right? Like your role in the process is to develop enough customer empathy by asking sort of probing questions, and continuing to like really dive deep and scope the problem correctly to help customers tease out their own problem, right? So it's kind of like being a shrink, whether you have enough, where you have enough empathy for your customer, that you're starting to form sort of a theory or a basis for your problem definition, right? I think that's like completely on the product manager, where you have enough context and you're able to tease that out of the customer. As long as they're willing to talk to you, as long as they're willing to like have a conversation about this, I think that any PM who is passionate about the problem would be able to fully understand it and then explain it back to the customer. On the second one, I see that there's like a few follow-up questions, so maybe I'll chunk everything together. So the first one was not able to explain the advantage of ML. Second was they're scared of ML. And then finally, customers want to know exactly what decisions will be made ahead of time versus trusting the model. I think the third one is slightly different. So let me chunk the first two and kind of take them together. So the fear and the differentiation, right? What's interesting is that in our role as AI/ML PMs, one of the most important things, and we continue to talk about this, within Alexa as an organization, but also I'm sure for any AI/ML PM in industry, we are very, very cognizant of privacy and security. So safety, trust, privacy, security, that's a huge problem space, right? For us, we constantly discuss how do we ensure that everything we're doing is privacy compliant, and we continue to earn the trust of customers. It is super critical to the role. And how we do that is, one, of course, it's by introducing features where customers can actually see what kind of data is being used to generate these solutions. So as an example, if you go into your Amazon.com account today, you would actually be able to download and get all of the data that Amazon has on you. And this is, common things like your previous purchases, right? Or your previous orders, or your address or your account details, common things that you yourself input. And then others where, you're looking at product recommendations, you're providing reviews. So this is the kind of data that Amazon would have on you and potentially use to help you, make better buying decisions. I think that feature, once it was launched, really helped earn trust, especially in Europe, where there are GDPR regulations, which is, it's a privacy regulation that applies to the EU, and it has very specific sort of nuances on what can and cannot be used to build models. In terms of fear around AI/ML, that is really a question of branding. It becomes a thing where, you need to prove to your customer that they can trust you with the data. So you could introduce features and all of that, and customers can see what you have. But at the same time, they need to trust your brand and trust you have the technical capabilities to build a machine learning solution that is not detrimental to them and benefits them. This is where it's a huge exercise in branding and positioning of the company, especially ensuring that, recently there was a security issue around LastPass where millions of customers had trusted LastPass with their passwords, and all sorts of passwords, right? Like your credit card account information and your health information. And it's problematic because now, even if one security breach has happened, nobody will go back and trust LastPass with their data. They will go, look to other solutions. And I think that, that's where you really need to prove to your customers that you have the technical capability and the right brand to actually build solutions in this space. And that takes a lot of relationship building, actually. more than anything else. Like if you look at even startups in AI ML, where startups in this space are actually able to retain their customers is when they have that trust. So that brand and reputation could come from personal relationships or maybe the brand of the CEO. But there's really no way around it. Like you need to build that positioning and brand with your customer. Yeah, that's been my experience so far. I would love to hear if others have more ideas on how you ensure customers feel safe when it comes to AI ML solutions. And hopefully I answered both those questions. Please let me know if I did not. I'm happy to make sure that I fully answer your question. Kaylee asked the question, customers want to know exactly what decisions will be made ahead of time versus trusting the model. Excuse me. So I would say that this too is an exercise in branding. There is a concept known as explainability within machine learning, where I could have like hundreds or thousands of features going to a machine learning model. And it's not an equation where I'd know ahead of time what the decision of the model will be, versus I could have a very simple model, maybe a simple decision tree where there's 15 features or 20 features, and I know exactly what's going to come out of it. The more complex my model, the less explainable it becomes. I may not always have the decisions that will be made ahead of time. So all I can do in that phase, like depending on how explainable your model is, I can show customers the data, or I can show them, well, here's the precision and recall of the model that I've seen over time, right? I think that if your user is not familiar with machine learning, that concept in itself of explainability may be difficult to tell them about, right? Like you won't be able to reason with them and tell them, I can't give you the decision ahead of time. So in that case, I think the best approach would be to demonstrate expertise, demonstrate like competence in this domain, right? So maybe using as a proxy previous models that were launched and how they helped customers, showing the data on your current model, building that brand reputation around how the data is being used. And actually diving deep on specific use cases. And there will be a hand-holding approach when the customer is not familiar with machine learning. But again, I feel like it goes back to competence. That's been my experience, where for customers to trust, for them to trust you with their data, they need to believe you know what you're doing in this space. And that only comes with, that relationship building. It definitely won't happen with, they may not understand machine learning, but if they trust that you have the right skills and competence, I feel like you'd be able to get the right level of traction there. I know we're about 21 minutes in, so I'll walk through the remaining ones, and they're fairly short. I can walk through them really quickly. So the next one here that I wanted to talk about is lack of an ML pipeline. I mentioned earlier that one of the issues that customers don't realize they have is that they're doing things manually. They're building only for themselves and not in a scalable way, which means that eventually they will encounter challenges in terms of achieving a certain level of cost and continuing to build solutions that benefit more and more customers without having some scalable processes in terms of a pipeline, some platform level features across each phase of model training, model evaluation, validation, deployment, and feature storage. It would be difficult to scale your solution and be difficult to cater to more and more customers. So what we've done within Amazon, I think most FANG companies have some semblance of this, would be to build an ML pipeline that helps you serve more and more customers. Netflix definitely has one version of this, and I'd be happy to share articles around that. And Amazon does too, where you're building a generalizable way of doing things so that it becomes easier to deploy, iterate, and learn on top of machine learning models. Your customers, even scientists within our organization, may not necessarily realize they have this problem unless and until we show them the benefits, right? And that has been, in my experience, one pitfall where Like we need to build things in a platformable way and do that quickly so that we can scale our solutions. So let me do this. In the interest of time, I'll walk through the remaining 3 pitfalls one after the other, and then we can chunk our questions towards the end, cluster them for any part of this presentation. The fourth would be deciding when you have enough scope to have a minimum viable product, right? With machine learning, it becomes especially challenging because scientists they think from the perspective of, it's great to work with scientists because they have so many ideas. They think from the perspective of what is going to solve the problem from the customer's perspective. And they're definitely thinking of business impact, but they may not be thinking of engineering viability. So I'll give you an example. Recently, I worked on a machine learning model which had about thousands of features, right? We had to use 3 different data sources. We had to work with teams across 3 different organizations to actually get the data sets and ensure they could be vended out within the machine learning model in real time. So this for me was not a minimum viable product because it would introduce X additional weeks of engineering effort to make the solution available in production. From a machine learning standpoint, it was perfect because it solved the problem, but it didn't necessarily qualify as a minimum viable product. So then what I decided to do is say, okay, instead of 3 feature storage, 3 different data stores, I would use 1. And then which one should that be? And how much of a lift am I going to get with it? So then I scoped the problem down. How much engineering effort is this going to save? And how can I optimize, right? Doing this and then continuing to build your solution, get some level of business impact, and then measure it and then iterate. That process is way more efficient than trying to solve for everything at once. So that's really where the role of the PM comes in with an AI/ML tool. It's like you're the glue between engineering and science, because you really need to understand viability from both perspectives and also keep on top of mind your customer problem and ensure you're solving for the right thing. And then finally, and I've alluded to this, A/B experimentation, right? You'll be surprised to know that the number of machine learning models that are launched today within all sorts of companies, FANG companies, smaller startups, without doing any sort of A/B experimentation. For those familiar with it, the benefits, right? You need to see, you may have some ideas and think, okay, this is a great idea, this is going to give me so much impact. But unless and until you pressure test it with real production live traffic, there's really no way to see whether it will work or not. Typically, what a lot of scientists end up doing is they do shadow mode testing, where they have some data sets that are not in production, maybe taken offline data taken from a couple of weeks back. They do a shadow mode, test the model with it, see the viability of the model, and then they launch. But they do not account for something very critical, which is known as data drift. The data and the customer data continues to change. Depending on your business, it may change every week. And your machine learning model may already be behind unless and until you've tested with production traffic. So this is a very critical piece of the picture. And this actually relates to that ML pipeline. It's a difficult thing to do A/B experimentation with machine learning models. It's not an easy problem to solve. And you actually need platform level capabilities around this, because it's difficult for scientists. They don't have the right skill sets to build this A/B experimentation platform. That's why they do a lot of shadow testing, actually. So yeah, I would kind of summarize by saying, 5 pitfalls we spoke about: product discovery, competitive analysis. These are general product pitfalls. Getting more specific, lack of an ML pipeline. How to decide whether you have enough to build an MVP. And then finally, how to ensure that you're testing your models, doing an A/B experimentation prior to actually deploying and launching your model at full scale. Yeah, I'd love to take any questions. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the presentation. Love to discuss it.
All right, let's see if anybody comes back here with some additional Q&A, Prerna, maybe on those topics. I'd love to dive in maybe to the pitfall around the lack of an ML pipeline just a little bit more. I wonder if maybe you could just dive into that, just from a perspective of where the breakpoints tend to happen
Sure.
Are there some common patterns here that maybe you've seen show up in early stage companies versus maybe late stage companies, or any kind of patterns there that the teams can kind of look out to avoid?
Breaking the problem down a bit, with early stage companies, I think that you're unlikely to have an ML infrastructure. So you would, if you had to make a choice between launching a model versus investing in an infrastructure, you would say, I'm just going to launch the model as quickly as I can. I have a business to run. Excuse me. So I think that you would be less likely to make an investment in an ML infrastructure as an early stage team, right? Which presents an interesting problem, right? You're doing things in a non-scalable way, but you also want to make sure you're continuing to like iterate on it. That's the name of the game in an early stage company. You need to continue iterating to show that business impact. How that could work out for an early stage company is if you're looking ahead and saying, in order to iterate effectively, I know I need to iterate. I can't invest in an infrastructure. In order to iterate effectively, I need to figure out who to partner with to get the infrastructure. So there's actually solutions out there. So as an example, AWS SageMaker, I know Google has its own ML pipelines as well that can be used, and they're all open source. It makes a lot of sense to kind of leverage that infrastructure versus build it. And it's better to leverage the infrastructure versus not. It's not a good idea to, especially in machine learning. And I know this is not it's like nuance, because it's not the same with other tech products. With other tech products, you're just going to like build some hacky code and launch something quickly. It just doesn't work out in machine learning. So I think what would be best, my recommendation for early stage companies would be to partner with a team that has already built an ML infrastructure and just start there, leverage it, use it, and like continue to hone in on your business problem.
Yeah.
With a late stage company, using an external ML infrastructure is not helpful, because then you encounter this issue of cost. It's very expensive. It's like, I think the external pricing for SageMaker is per million events. I think it's like over $5, right? And imagine if you have like 100 million events per model that you need to process, and at on a monthly basis or even on a weekly basis, that just doesn't scale well. So in that case, that's where teams, especially within FANG companies, come in and say, I'm just going to build my own ML infrastructure because I need to improve on my efficiency or use something internal. And that's where they come in and say, okay, so I need to figure out across the feature storage stage, across the deployment and hosting, across the actual online feature engineering. So these three things, like the storage, the hosting, and the feature engineering, how can I optimize my cost? So that's what I think is the nuance between early and late stage.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really appreciate that. I think it's because I think a lot of teams struggle about like the when to, I guess, to own it versus to outsource it, when to bring it in. And I think that's a good sort of catalyst point in that pipeline from an answer perspective as to when to make that shift and change. That's really good. One question here that came up was, how do you know if ML is the right solution for a problem?
I would answer it in two ways. So I would talk to you a little bit about, is there a simpler solution? So I'll talk to you about options. Then I'll talk to you about the data. And then finally, the explainability piece, which I alluded to earlier. So these three aspects, right? So as I mentioned, and I think one of the sort of conclusions of this discussion is that investing in ML is time consuming. Building the right infrastructure, even integrating with it is time consuming. So there's definitely an additional effort and cost when it comes to machine learning. So in that case, I would say, and we do this even working within the ML space, we're constantly doing this, where we're exploring, are there options where I don't need to use machine learning? Can I just launch like a simple if-else condition-based decision tree and solve for the problem? And will I get the business impact that I'm looking for? That may save me X engineering weeks of effort and Y science weeks of effort, and get me my like answers and the the impact I'm looking to make in this world more quickly. So having those options on the table is one way in which you can like say, okay, is ML right for this problem, right? The second aspect of this would be the data itself. Do you have the data sets, both in terms of size and like the, I guess there's no better way to say it, like the data sets need to be clean in order to build a machine learning model out of it. So do you have the right data sets in terms of the size? And then is the data clean enough where you can use it to build a high performing machine learning model? If the answer to both of those questions is no, then machine learning is not the right solution to your problem. And then finally, and I think there was a great question earlier about this, is how explainable does your ML model need to be? Does it need to be where, I give you an input and this is my expected output each time? Or can it be, I give you an input and like, these are the range of outputs, right? Depending on how explainable your solution needs to be, you may decide that I just want, to make simple decisions where I kind of like have a clear mapping of the inputs and outputs. And in which case, I don't need a machine learning model because there's no complex decision that needs to be made. Versus if you want to give a range of options to your customer, or it's not so easy to make one decision versus another, I think that's where machine learning models really come in, right? So I would actually look at these three kind of components to decide whether ML is right for the problem.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe one last quick question before we wrap things up here. How would you help gain stakeholder buy-in from executives who are hesitant of ML products, particularly around taking over other teams' jobs or scopes?
Oh, wow. That's an amazing question. To be truthful, I mean, I haven't encountered this within my team because we are part of a machine learning team. But if I were to put myself in somebody's shoes where, executives aren't really bought into machine learning, I would say start small. Actually start to like scope down your problem. Say, okay, for these million customers, I'm going to launch, a solution for 1% of the traffic and then run it for a month and show you the results. Make it very, very data driven, make it about scoping it down, reducing the risk, as well as proving your business impact. I feel that an executive who is not bought into the idea of machine learning will not be convinced. And if you give them like a whole bunch of information or, here's why machine learning is great. Instead, you could show them how you would test the solution for their customers and prove the data, prove the business impact at a very small scale, and then take baby steps towards, scaling the solution up and convincing them further. And I've actually found that to be an effective approach with any executive in general.
Yeah, regardless of whether it's an ML problem or not, right? On that side. Yeah, that's really good. Okay, I really, really appreciate the time here. I'm going to shift over just to wrap things up here and close stuff out for the morning. I am going to share a link in the chat, but we do and would love to get your feedback and thoughts on the event. If you can take a moment to fill out the survey, we will share this feedback with Prerna, as well as you have an opportunity to win one of our weekly or sort of monthly prizes on this side. We also invite you to continue the conversation. Maybe you've got other questions, things you want to know about related to ML and AI and those incorporating that into your product. Feel free to post a question or share a comment post-event. Always open for some conversations to hear what others are doing in this space and what's working for them or what's not, what some of the challenges you might be running into on that side. Next week, we have Anna Dahlstrom joining us. She'll be talking about creating orderly chaos during discovery with storytelling. Anna's the author of a fantastic book on design and storytelling, and I think we'll have a lot of interesting stuff to share. We also have a number of other events running through January, February, and March, everything from our roundtable to various topics around discovery and understanding customer and user needs. And also always interested in hearing from different people. So if you're one of the people in attendance today, maybe you got something to share about your product craft, feel free to reach to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation about including you as a speaker within our overall events. Lots of other programs too and things you can get involved in, like our Make Your Mentor program and also our Product Makers Book Club, which are both active this particular quarter as well on that side. And with that, thank you very much, Prerna, for joining us. I appreciate the time today and all the insights. Really great to see you. And thanks everybody for joining. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.